Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. This episode will take a look at Flyjet. Incorporated on the 13th of June 2002, Flyjet was one of two new charter airlines launched that year, with the other being Australis. Headquartered on the grounds of London Gatwick Airport, Flyjet was owned by business partners Sean Dewey and Mike Hawkins. Both had previous experience in the aviation industry, having been involved with Inter-European Airways before their acquisition by Air Tours in 1993. Dewey had most recently been the managing director of Airworld until it was absorbed into Flying Colours when the former's parent acquired the latter. Flyjet took delivery of its first aircraft the following May with the arrival of a 13-year-old Boeing 757-200. The aircraft had been delivered to Inter-European Airways back in 1990 and was transferred over to Air Tours during their acquisition of IEA in 1993, ironically around the same time that both Dewey and Hawkins had left the company. The Flyjet livery was both simple and smart. A white fuselage with billboard Flyjet titles and swoosh logo. The tail was a deep blue and also featured the Flyjet titles and logo, as did the aircraft's engines. In a very strange coincidence, the Brazilian airline, ATA Brazil, adopted the exact same livery and logo. The former cargo airline had just changed hands and moved into the low-fare passenger operations. One aircraft that was scheduled to join their fleet happened to be in the UK for repainting at the same time as the Flyjet 757, so perhaps the two had split the fee on the design costs. Following the arrival of their first aircraft, the airline was able to undertake training flights and the required proving flights for the UK Civil Aviation Authority. On the 13th of June 2003, the airline was awarded its certification and licenses and Flyjet was in business, exactly 1 year and a day after its incorporation. A second Boeing 757 joined the Flyjet fleet in mid-July. This aircraft was 14 years old, having been delivered to Hispania in 1989. Hispania, who will be covered another time, went bust just weeks after the arrival of this aircraft, so it was shipped off to the rapidly expanding Air 2000, where, aside from a few months scabbing for Ansett Australia, it would remain until joining Flyjet. It would make its inaugural Flyjet flight just 2 weeks later on the 31st of July, operating from Gatwick to Preveza. Initially, Flyjet had two bases, London Gatwick and Manchester, with their fleet sharing duties between them. Despite a fairly late start to the summer season, Flyjet had secured contracts to operate flights to Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, Spain, Portugal and the Canary Islands. As a fully independent charter airline, Flyjet was able to operate a mix of regularly scheduled charter flights as well as undertake a variety of ad hoc work, be it last-minute sub-charters for other carriers or undertaking more interesting duties such as taking sports fans to and from events. One very interesting contract was with Poo UK, which would see Flyjet operate flights from Gatwick to Birmingham and then on to Amritsar in India. These flights began in October and would continue to operate sporadically through the winter season, with Flyjet having the distinction of being the first British airline to operate a direct flight from the UK to Amritsar. The winter of 2003 saw Flyjet gain even more spot hire work, with one of their 757s operating from London Gatwick to Port Harcourt in Nigeria that December. The airline also began 2004 by operating countless Hajj flights to Jeddah, initially on behalf of Royal Air Maroc and picking up pilgrims in Casablanca, Agadir and Oujda. Flyjet also temporarily based a 757 in Kuwait in order to transport pilgrims from Kuwait to Jeddah, operating 2 to 3 trips per day. Flyjet had also established a lucrative contract with MAN Commercial Vehicles to transport dealers to Valencia to test a new range of vehicles at their Valencia race circuit. This would see a Flyjet 757 visiting Brussels, Cologne, Copenhagen, Hamburg, Salzburg and Vienna during the first few weeks of the new year. The summer of 2004 saw Flyjet resume regular holiday charter flying, which would once again see the Flyjet 757s visiting typical holiday resort airports. However, the airline had also something exciting on the horizon. In July 2004, Flyjet operated its first flight to Ghana, with a 757 flying non-stop from London Gatwick to Accra. These fortnightly flights were on behalf of Ghana Travel, a UK-based tour operator, and its Ghana-based subsidiary, GH Travel. Flyjet was spreading itself quite thin, however. With just 2 aircraft sharing all that flying, even the smallest delay would have a huge knock-on for days. With the airline picking up even more work, this left little slack for the 2 hard-working 757s to make up any lost time. Flyjet found itself at the bottom of the league tables for punctuality amongst British charter airlines for the summer of 2004, with less than half of all flights departing on time and an average of 1 in 5 flights delayed by over an hour. With even more work on the horizon, and in an effort to cut delays, Flyjet revealed their intention to double their fleet by requiring 2 more Boeing 757-200s. Unfortunately, this didn't come to fruition, and the Flyjet fleet remained at just 2 aircraft. Like a number of British charter carriers, Flyjet was able to operate a number of festive flights on the run-up to Christmas. These Santa flights take families on day trips up to Lapland in order to see Father Christmas, his elves and the reindeer, and are very popular here in the UK. They are an excellent source of revenue and a great way to use spare aircraft during the quieter winter season. Flyjet would be operating these Santa flights on behalf of third-party travel agencies and would fly from Manchester, Gatwick, Birmingham, Bournemouth, Dublin and Cork to several Lapland airports. Flyjet was also supposed to operate some trips from Newcastle, however cancelled the flights at literally the last minute, opting to use its aircraft on regular holiday flights and leaving the kiddies crying their eyes out at the gates. In the interest of fairness, I should point out that TUI, who are a much larger company than Flyjet, pulled this same stunt last Christmas to a friend of mine, opting to use their 737 for a flight to Spain and leaving his kids bawling at the gate, so even the big carriers do it too. With the Santa flights behind them, Flyjet found itself called to action to help in the relief efforts following the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, which had devastated Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India and Thailand. The Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs chartered a Flyjet 757 to take medical staff and supplies to the affected area. The aircraft flew from Madrid to Istanbul before stopping off Emiratesar before reaching Indonesia. The aircraft also collected medical staff who were returning from their 3-week stints and was routed back to Madrid via Kuala Lumpur and Doha. The start of 2005 also saw Flyjet awarded several licenses, allowing the airline to operate flights to the United States, Canada and Mexico. This was just in time too, as Flyjet's inaugural flight to Cancun departed on the 12th of March with a stopover in Montreal. The following month, Flyjet would operate a handful of flights to the Cape Verde Islands on behalf of Cabo Verde Airlines, TACV, the country's flag carrier. On the 11th of March 2005, Flyjet abruptly cancelled its Gatwick to Accra flight, with the airline citing financial problems at Ghana Travel. There was quite a lot of animosity between the two parties by now. Flyjet was accused of failing to meet its contractual obligations, mainly regarding passenger numbers. Ghana Travel had been selling 233 seats on the flights, however, when factoring in the weight of passengers and their luggage, 210 seats would be the absolute limit. A result of this was delays, and in some cases diversions for fuel stops, which would of course lead to more delays. Sometimes bags were left behind and needed shipping separately, which again led to further costs. On the other hand, Flyjet was allegedly owed several £100,000 from Ghana Travel after rather foolishly operating flights without prepayment. The two companies were in the process of going their separate ways. Ghana Travel had signed a contract with fellow 2002 startup Astraeus to operate the route, and the first flights had gone ahead, but Ghana Travel was soon forced into liquidation, allegedly by Flyjet, who are now its major creditor. This loss of a regular twice-weekly flight was of course a blow to Flyjet, though arguably, if they weren't being paid for it, was it really a loss? Flyjet would naturally have no trouble finding more work to fill in the gaps in its schedule, though, with the airline picking up even more ad hoc work, especially jobs involving transporting sports fans to overseas fixtures. In August 2005, Flyjet announced that it had secured the lease of its first wide-bodied aircraft, a Boeing 767-300ER, which was to be delivered later in the year. The 20-year-old aircraft had been delivered to LAN Airlines in 1986 and had also seen service with Trans-Brazil and Air Madagascar before it was placed into storage in January 2003. The Cameroon government acquired the aircraft next, however they only operated the aircraft for a short while before it was once again placed into storage. The 767 would remain in storage until it was finally delivered to Flyjet in April 2006, but more on this in a bit. In mid-November, one of Flyjet's 757s was taken out of action when a baggage truck got intimate with the right-hand engine of the aircraft after it had skidded on ice. The aircraft was grounded for 3 weeks while parts were sourced to repair the damaged engine. This was rather fortuitous timing for Flyjet, however, as while the aircraft was laid up awaiting repair, it found itself impounded. Flyjet was in pretty bad shape financially, especially after taking the heavy loss on the Ghana job, with the airline even going as far as trying to delay paying its wages. With the aircraft awaiting repair, it both conveniently disguised the fact that it had been impounded and also allowed the airline to claim on the insurance for being unable to operate the aircraft due to the damage. The aircraft was both repaired and released back into service by late December. December once again saw Flyjet undertake a number of Santa specials to Rovaniemi and Kalita in Finland from a number of UK airports, with no reports of any last-minute cancellations this time. Flyjet had also been called in to operate a small number of flights from Paris to Bamako, Dakar, and Ouagadougou in Mali, Senegal and Burkina Faso respectively. In early 2006, Flyjet signed a deal with XL Airways to operate flights on their behalf from Newcastle. XL had established a base there the year before using 2 Boeing 737-400s damp leased from their sister airline Islands Flug. However, due to a combination of factors including reliability issues and the limited range of the aircraft, it was decided to replace these for the busy 2006 season. Unfortunately, XL didn't have any spare aircraft which could be based in Newcastle and was well aware of the dangers of spreading itself too thin, and this is where Flyjet stepped in. Flyjet agreed to operate XL's charter flying programme from Newcastle for the next 3 years, with 1 Boeing 757 to be based there for the summer. Flyjet of course only had the 2 aircraft which were now being split between 3 bases, Gatwick, Manchester and now Newcastle. Having seemingly not learnt any lessons from the previous summer, the airline also signed a contract with new startup airline, Munich Airlines, to operate long-haul flights on their behalf. Flyjet was to operate a once-per-week service between Munich and Bermuda, ideally using their 767, which would be in a very spacious business-class cabin configuration. Actually, it was a bit more complicated than that. Flyjet had also been courting a potential new airline, Fly First Class, which wanted Flyjet to operate on their behalf between London and Wilmington, North Carolina, with a stop-off in Bermuda. The 767 would be configured to carry a maximum of 90 passengers in a 3-class configuration of First, Business and Suite. With just one 767, Flyjet would yet again be spreading itself thin. However, with both routes involving Bermuda, there was a chance that they could make this work. They still needed the 767 first, though. Flyjet finally took delivery of its Boeing 767 in April 2006, just in time too with the Munich Airlines job set to begin at the start of June. Unfortunately for Flyjet, however, this was a bit of a false start, as the 767 was going nowhere for the time being. While the Civil Aviation Authority were happy to let Flyjet operate crew training flights around the country, they would not sign off on the aircraft for passenger use. It was reported that the CAA were unhappy about the aircraft's tech records from its time in Africa, which may have seen non-approved parts being used on the aircraft. June 2006 would see Flyjet really begin to unravel. The Munich Airlines job was abandoned at the 11th hour and it really fell apart up in Newcastle. With their 2 757s split between 3 bases, it was inevitable that there would be major disruption once the summer season got into full swing. Thunderstorms, slots and ATC delays are all the norm during this time of year, and sure enough, within weeks of the season beginning, it fell apart. It didn't help that the 757s were going tech with alarming regularity, leading to lengthy delays that in turn led to costly subcharters. Things had gotten so bad at Newcastle that Flyjet admitted defeat and hired Finnair to come and operate flights on their behalf for the summer. Finnair would provide a Boeing 757 with pilots, leaving Flyjet to provide the cabin crew, with the arrangement expected to last at least 3 months. There is a little irony here in that Finnair were covering for Flyjet, who were covering for XL, who had taken over from Air Scandic, whose delays were legendary and had led to the airline's demise towards the end of 2005. In July, the 767, which had now spent nearly 6 weeks sunbathing on the ramp at Manchester Airport, finally shifted. It was ferried to Lasham, becoming the first wide-body aircraft to visit the airfield in the process. It would remain there until late October, when it was again ferried, this time to Southend for further storage. By August, the level of disruption and disarray at Flyjet had led to the UK Civil Aviation Authority issuing the airline a letter revoking its operating licence, giving the airline leave to appeal, which in the meantime allowed Flyjet to continue operating on borrowed time. The airline was regularly having multi-hour delays across its flying programme. The 757 fleet was going tech with alarming regularity, the 767 looked set to never carry passengers, and to top it off, both the chief pilot and the airline's technical director had left, allegedly in frustration with both the 767 and the general state of the airline. Although Flyjet appealed the CAA's revocation notice, it really did look like the end was near. After all, far better run airlines have been grounded for less. The first big change came days later with the introduction of both a new chairman and a new finance director. The incoming chairman was Peter Owen, a man who had spent 21 years with British Airways and had finished his time there as the head of operations in 1990 and briefly served as the chief executive of Aer Lingus. He then spent time away from aviation and had graced the boardrooms of healthcare and insurance companies before returning to the sector, and would soon take up roles at 3 airlines, none of which would survive the next 2 years. Flyjet also began discussions with various interested parties with regards to funding the airline, either through a takeover, merger or business partnership. These actions seemed to be enough to satisfy the CAA, who allowed Flyjet to continue operating, though it would continue to keep an eye on the airline. August saw some more good news for Flyjet, with the airline announcing that it had signed a deal with Scanways, the third largest tour operator in Denmark. Flyjet were to operate a long-haul programme from Copenhagen from December through to April for the next 3 years, with destinations including the United Arab Emirates, India and Thailand. Flyjet were planning on using one of their 757s to operate this programme because of course they had learnt nothing over the past 2 years of calamitous delays through spreading itself too thin. Ultimately the contract was cancelled, with another airline stepping in to save Scanways. September saw Flyjet return to Newcastle with their own metal, releasing the Finnair aircraft from its costly damp lease agreement. A Flyjet 757 would operate the final 2 months of the busy summer schedule before settling in for a much more achievable winter schedule, which would see the aircraft operate on 1 rotation to the Canary Islands Tuesday through Saturday and a run to Egypt on Sunday, with Monday free for any planned maintenance. With such a sensible schedule lined up for Newcastle, had Flyjet finally begun to learn a lesson? We will never know for certain, as on the 1st of October 2006, Flyjet was acquired by a newly forming airline called Silverjet. Despite there already being several airlines offering an all-business class service on the transatlantic market, Silverjet were looking to join the fray, with big ambitions of new routes heading out in all directions and offering much more than the competition could. First though, they needed to wade through a lot of regulatory red tape, and this is where Flyjet came in. By acquiring Flyjet, Silverjet had gained itself a launch aircraft, air operator's certificate, operating licence, worldwide route licence and ETOPS certification, all packaged up neatly for the low fee of £4 million. The takeover allowed Silverjet to speed up its launch, as it no longer needed to gain its own licences, as it could simply use Flyjet's. The acquisition was good for Flyjet, at least in the short term, as it gave the airline financial security and helped satisfy the Civil Aviation Authority that they were capable of operating its intended services. Under Silverjet's ownership, it was intended that the Flyjet charter programme would continue as planned, at least as far as the 757s were concerned. The 767, on the other hand, would be put to use on Silverjet's premium services. This was somewhat problematic, however, as the errant aircraft had been banished to a tiny airfield in Southend and was still waiting for a cabin refit, and of course for the CAA to actually sign off the aircraft for public service. There was also the small matter of the contract between Flyjet and Fly First Class, who was still expecting to use the 767 on their own premium transatlantic service. With Silverjet providing the cash, it was able to jump-start the Flyjet 767 back to life. first getting the aircraft signed off by the CAA and quickly pressed into service covering for one of Flyjet's 757s, which inevitably had broken down again. A few weeks later, the aircraft was shipped off to the Netherlands for a paint job and finally getting a nice new interior. The CAA also signed off the aircraft for passenger use, which meant that Silverjet's business class long-haul operation could soon begin. Now, Silverjet would piggyback on Flyjet's AOC, however, in the interest of keeping things simple and keeping the video from getting too long, I'm going to focus on Flyjet and only mention Silverjet's activities where appropriate, as I'll cover them in greater detail in the next episode. In December, Flyjet moved their head office from Gatwick to Luton, joining up with Silverjet at the latter's new head office facilities. The two airlines were still treated as separate entities, however, with this leading to a lot of animosity between Flyjet and Silverjet staff, especially so between the crews, with management allegedly quoted as saying that Flyjet is a taxi company and Silverjet is a limo. The animosity grew even worse when in January it was announced that the Gatwick base was closing and that should any crew members wish to move to Silverjet, they had to apply as a fresh candidate from the outside. Silverjet made its inaugural flight on the 25th of January 2007 when the ex-Flyjet 767 departed London Luton bound for New York Newark. As for the Fly First class contract, well, when Silverjet acquired Flyjet, they inherited the existing agreement and offered to provide FFC with an alternative 767 as well as pay a $1 million termination fee and also refund this $750,000 deposit that FFC had paid to Flyjet. This seemed to placate FFC initially, but several months later they had received nothing that was promised and ended up filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Silverjet. With Silverjet finally taking to the skies and already anticipating growing its route network ahead of the arrival of its next two aircraft, the writing was clearly on the wall for Flyjet, and it came as no surprise on the 10th of August that it was announced that Flyjet was to cease charter flying activities at the end of the summer season, with the axe to fall on the 31st of October. Flyjet issued a press release which had stated several factors which had led to the decision to close the airline down. Primarily consolidation amongst other tour operators, a very difficult year for Flyjet with numerous contracts cancelled and several lengthy technical delays, and that the leases were expiring on their two 757s. While Flyjet had announced an orderly winding down of their charter operation for the end of October, they soon announced that they would be chartering aircraft from other airlines to cover the final few weeks of the flying programme. This was in order to prepare both of the Boeing 757s for their handover back to the leasing companies. XL France and the Spanish carrier Gurjet were brought in to operate the remainder of Flyjet's flying programme from Newcastle, very ironic considering that Flyjet itself was operating for XL Airways UK. On the 4th of October 2007, Flyjet operated its last commercial flight using its own aircraft. The flagship 757 GFJEA had the honours with it arriving in Newcastle as flight FJE 609 from Lanzarote. The aircraft, along with her sister ship, were withdrawn for their end-of-lease maintenance and would soon find a new life in the cargo market with FedEx. So, while Silverjet carried on, Flyjet was now grounded, permanently. Well, technically not, as Flyjet as a company renamed themselves to Silverjet Air Operations Limited, but that doesn't have the same ring to it as grounded permanently. So, what went wrong? Well, the very short answer is that Silverjet bought Flyjet for their certificates and a pony of a 767, then discarded Flyjet. Of course, it is far more complicated than that. Flyjet quickly established themselves as a can-do charter airline, but then things soon began to unravel as Flyjet continually bit off more than it could chew, with the airline agreeing contracts that it had very little chance of completing without difficulty. The airline had two aircraft which were split between three bases, and despite having steady work for them, continued to agree more and more contracts. With just two aircraft, this was asking for trouble. There was little to no downtime between flights, meaning that delays would have a massive knock-on effect and cause considerable disruption, which, due to the lack of downtime, led to more disruption and so on until it hit a bit of downtime, usually for scheduled maintenance, which, unless it was urgent or mandatory, could be skipped, but would then cause the aircraft to go tech, leading to more delays. By the summer of 2007, Flyjet's reliability was at an all-time low, with the airline racking up several very lengthy delays. In June, a Newcastle to Paphos flight was delayed over 27 hours. This was just weeks after a Newcastle to Egypt flight had a similar delay, to the point that the police were called in to deal with the passengers' revolt, which was then used as a nice excuse to cancel the flight outright. With Flyjet having so much difficulty actually reliably operating its flying programme, it was bound to lose contracts. This being the decline in work that the airline's management brought up during their press release. While the airline would naturally be responsible for the delay, it was the tour operator which would bear the brunt of the complaints from the angry passengers, potentially losing customers in the long run. I won't book with them as they use Flyjet, and so on. This is a particularly big issue for the smaller tour operators who don't necessarily have a fleet of aircraft operating under their own brand and are instead reliant on securing seats on other carriers, be it a well-established airline or a small independent. There have been several instances where smaller tour operators have lost considerable business because of reliability issues with their chosen airline. Notably, Olympic Holidays, who are not exactly a small company, had a lot of trouble when their carrier of choice, Small Planet Airlines, had a string of issues during one busy summer season. This leads to the next point: consolidation within the UK tour operator industry. Between the 1990s and early 2000s, there were several mergers and acquisitions which saw numerous small tour operators scooped up into what became the Big Five: Air Tours, Cosmos, First Choice, Thomas Cook and Thomson. Just a few years after Flyjet took to the skies, the landscape had changed drastically. First Choice and Thomson merged, as did MyTravel, formerly known as Air Tours, and Thomas Cook, becoming the first and second largest tour operators in the country by an order of magnitude. Third place was taken by the XL Leisure Group, while Cosmos plodded along in fourth. This consolidation led to fewer opportunities for Flyjet to score business. These travel companies had large fleets of aircraft at their disposal, and with Flyjet having a major reliability problem, even the small independent companies would rather pay more for seats on their flights than risk it with Flyjet. XL were arguably propping up Flyjet in their later years, handing them a lucrative contract to operate out of Newcastle, and even sticking by them despite Flyjet falling apart on numerous occasions and tarnishing XL's name in the process. Flyjet did not have sufficient finances to improve their situation. They either needed to reduce the flying programme to improve reliability or bring in more aircraft and spread the flying out. They couldn't reduce the flying programme as they needed the money from said flying, and they couldn't bring in more aircraft as they couldn't afford the lease fees, particularly so as the 757 was still in demand for both passenger and cargo work. To be brutally honest, Flyjet should have gone bust in 2006. They had taken a nasty hit on their finances with the whole Ghana travel debacle, and their absolute hanger queen of a 767 should have been the final nail in their coffin. Bizarrely, it was to be their saviour, at least in the short term, as it enticed Silverjet, desperate for a quick launch, to see Flyjet as a pre-packaged airline launch kit and bought them before they bit the dust. In our next episode, we'll take a look at the full Silverjet story as we step into the war of the business class airlines. If you have any comments, suggestions or criticisms, please do get in touch. If you can't post here, don't worry. I've got a contact form on my website, and I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. I've got plenty more episodes in the work, so if you haven't already, why not subscribe to catch them as they land, and as always, thanks for watching.